Dear listeners, we have good news. In the description under this video, you can find our new channel. Please support our channel by subscribing, so you won't miss any new fascinating stories. Enjoy listening to it. Steve worked for a cargo airline for 20 years, during which time he piloted several types of aircraft, both as a co-pilot and in command. A year ago, he took up a position as the commander of the largest Boeing 747 cargo aircraft. Steve liked the plane with its glass cockpit, crew of only 2 pilots, and various safety systems. He and his wife Lena then arranged a holiday. Steve was making good money, so he could afford something special. In fact, over the 20 years of their marriage, he was the one who had arranged almost everything in their huge family mansion. And first of all, it concerned security systems, various alarms, motion detectors, and video surveillance cameras. Lena, on her part, took care of the garden. The garden was rich, but not with exotic plants, but with ornamental trees that grew quite well in that climate. Steve, in addition to installing various security systems, also built a garage for 2 cars. And in fact, he bought the cars himself. Not the most sophisticated ones, of course, but quite decent ones. When it came to driving, Lena was careful and almost never broke the rules of the road. Steve himself also drove very calmly. However, neither the cars nor the house itself meant as much to him as his expensive SLR camera. It was the latest model, all black, with a set of multiple lenses. Steve's passion for fine art photography was what gave his life meaning. It was a passion that was more important to him than anything else. Steve took care of the camera himself, did not let his wife even come close to it, and kept it in a closet behind thick glass under the scrutiny of surveillance cameras. Lena sighed. She understood her husband's fascination, but not completely. She didn't understand why he had to be so worried about the camera. "I can't do without it, that's all," Steve explained to her one day. "Art photography is life, not just for me. Look at how many photos I have on my computer hard drives. About 5 terabytes, if not more. And let's not forget how many of our shared memories are stored in those photos." Lena was relieved and did not ask any more questions. Life went on. Steve would go to work for a few days or even a week to deliver cargo from one point to another. He had to perform several actions, such as refueling the plane, ferrying it to the correct airfield, and loading it. Meanwhile, Lena spent all her free time with her friends. Unfortunately, in the long time that she and her husband had been married, Lena had never bothered to find a job. However, Steve did not insist, as his salary was enough to cover their expenses. Lena did not know Steve's work schedule. At most, he could tell her that he was leaving on another business trip in a few days for a certain period of time. And that suited Lena just fine. One day, Steve came home and heard his wife's phone ringing in the kitchen. Said Lena. "Yes, of course, everything's in order," she laughed. "Don't worry about it. It's a deal, Roger. All right, see you later." Steve shook his head, sighed, and walked into the kitchen. "Hey, I'm back a little early," he said. Lena flinched, put the phone away, turned to Steve, and smiled awkwardly. "Bye. How was the business trip?" "Due to heavy fog and co-pilot error, we almost landed in the pine trees instead of the runway," Steve replied. "Was it scary?" Lena asked Steve, apparently just for the sake of conversation. "Scary," Steve nodded, "especially taking into account that we had fuel in the tanks for the return flight." "And what happened to the co-pilot?" Lena was clearly trying to steer the conversation away, and Steve noticed it. Let's leave it at that. It doesn't concern me anymore. I'll be assigned another co-pilot. How have you been living here? Who was that guy you were talking to? What did you 2 agree on?" His wife's eyes flickered around the room, and it was apparent that Lena was trying to think of an answer, but nothing came to mind. Finally, she said, "So this is the man who raises the curly hens." Steve jerked his head again and asked incredulously, "What do you need curly chickens for?" "Well," Lena lowered her eyes and said, "I just thought we could use some animals in our garden." "Why not a dog or a cat?" "That's not original. Where does this chicken breeder of yours live?" 20 kilometers out of town," Lena replied. "Makes sense. A case like this needs to be held outdoors and away from civilization. I'm glad you understand. When's your appointment with this guy?" 3 o'clock this afternoon. Okay, go ahead, Steve shrugged and went to his room. It was morning, and Steve had just returned from his flight. After arguing with his superiors about the co-pilot, he finally threatened to quit the airline. Only then did the boss say he would deal with the co-pilot. Steve, without undressing, flopped down on the bed and fell asleep. While he slept for a long time, Lena got into her car and drove to Steve's place. Steve, of course, began to suspect who Roger was, but for now, all suspicion was clouded by a desire to sleep. In the meantime, Lena showed up at Roger's place. Roger lived in a small hovel with thin wooden walls, wallpaper faded with time, and rusty pipes that were already chipping. The only signs of civilization were a more or less modern laptop and a smartphone, which Roger was charging at the moment. "So, did you get the picture?" Roger asked at once when Lena showed up on the doorstep. "I got it." She took the smartphone out of her bag and showed him the picture. She showed a picture of the very camera Steve appreciated so much. Roger had asked to take the pictures himself when he first met Lena. They had seen each other for the first time only 2 weeks before this meeting. One thing led to another and they got to talking. Then Roger invited Lena to his place and immediately dragged her to bed. Surprisingly, Lena liked it very much since she rarely did the same things with Steve. Lena had not had many meetings with Roger during those 2 weeks, and it was only on the third meeting that Roger finally asked, "Tell me about your Steve in general. How does he live?" You know, stuff like that. "Oh, he lives well. I mean, we're good," Lena said, "and he likes taking pictures. His camera is a really good, professional one. Very expensive." There was an interest in Roger's voice, but Lena did not pay attention to it. "Very expensive. It cost up to $100,000. Take a photo of that camera when you have a chance, and show it to me." "Okay, I will." And there she was. "You have no idea what it cost me. He's got CCTV cameras all over the place, so I had to sneak a picture. Luckily, Steve didn't see the CCTV footage." "You'd better show me what you got." Lena showed the pictures. "Who admired Roger? A serious camera. Is it worth much?" "What?" Lena didn't understand. "I want that camera." "Well, I want a lot of things too." "What's next? Don't you understand me?" "I want this camera. Once again, I want a lot of things too." "What's next?" "Bring me that camera, you stupid idiot." "They'll give me 40 grand for it, no less. With this money, I will buy myself a house by the sea." "Are you out of your fucking mind?" Then Roger grabbed Lena by the throat and pinned her against the wall. And he hissed, "If you don't bring the camera, bitch, everyone will see you cheating on your husband. I'm not scared of anything, but you'll be embarrassed for life. You bastard. You've been videotaping all our affairs." Roger grinned. "Sweetheart, I don't need to film anything. I have a friend who works in IT. He's good at video editing. And trust me, dearie, he can make a video that'll make you kill yourself with shame, you dirty, stupid bastard." Lena hissed. "So do we have a deal? Will you bring the camera?" "I will," said Lena. Then Roger let her go. Lena returned home in no mood at all. Steve was already on his feet, and he immediately noticed the mark on his wife's neck. "What the hell is that?" he asked in a flash. "Nothing." The wife grimaced and disappeared into her room. She and Steve had separate bedrooms. Steve and Lena hardly spoke to each other until the evening. Steve tried to talk, of course, but his wife was unresponsive. And by doing so, she only fed Steve's suspicions. The next day, Lena's phone rang again. "Hello," she answered. "Yeah, come on, forget it. I know you couldn't help it. I'll be right there. I got it to the lake. Okay, see you." She put the smartphone in her bag and told Steve, "I have to go back to that curly hen breeder's. I'm on my way." Before Steve could say anything, Lena jumped in the car and drove off. Steve followed her in his car. Lena led Steve to a lake on the edge of town. This was a favorite place for people to relax. Steve parked the car far away from the water, hid in the bushes, and watched through the zoom of his camera. What was going on was that Lena got out of the car and hugged a man with a narrow face and a fluffy mustache. Then Lena and the man kissed on the lips quite passionately. After this, there was some sort of unintelligible conversation. Judging by the body movements, Lena and the man were arguing again. And later the man hit Lena. Steve thought, should I intervene? But he stopped himself. Why stick up for Lena when she was passionately kissing the man? Let her solve her own problems. Still, I should talk to Lena about everything, Steve decided. So he went home. And soon Lena came home. She was in an even worse state of mind. She said quietly, "Honey, let's give the chicken breeder your camera as payment." Steve froze for a moment. What he heard made him forget all his plans. Steve smiled dully and asked, "Are you out of your mind, whore? Are you trying to kill me morally?" "Yes," he couldn't help but shout. "Tell the truth, whore. I know everything. So you don't have to lie to me." And then Lena burst into tears. Through her tears, Steve heard her confess that she had cheated on him with some guy named Roger. And Roger turned out to be a jerk and demanded a camera from Lena. "Why did you even tell him about my camera?" Steve yelled, "It's my thing. No one can know anything about it." Steve was yelling so loud it looked like the windows were gonna blow up. He was just angry, not so much because of the cheating, but because someone had their hands on his camera. "Help me, Steve," Lena asked through her tears. "I've been watching all your scenes through my camera. You know I have a good zoom. I've taken plenty of pictures." "You're like Roger," said Lena, feeling exhausted. "Listen to me, you idiot," Steve barked. "I've got your lover's license plate number." "So?" Lena didn't understand. "So I'm gonna send this information to a policeman I know, and have him run the guy's record through the database." So Steve called a certain Robertino, an Italian of Italian descent and an active detective. "No problem," Robertino responded. "Expect a call in half an hour." "Thanks, see you later." Robertino called even a little earlier. "Yes," Steve replied. "Listen, thanks for the tip. We've been looking for this guy for a while now. It's Marcus Looms, not Roger," as he introduced himself to your wife. "He's pretty famous. In short, he's an alpinist who lives off women. He's already been in prison twice for trying to scam gullible mistresses. And now they're for blackmail, beatings, and attempted murder." Well, it's an interesting subject, so Steve will catch the bait. And Robertino explained the plan to Steve. The next day, the plan was put into action. Lena took Steve's camera and drove to the lake, where she had arranged to meet Marcus beforehand. Marcus was already waiting. There were fishermen with fishing rods nearby, and they didn't seem to care. Only Steve and Robertino, who were hiding in the bushes nearby, knew that the fishermen were policemen in disguise. As Lena handed the camera to Marcus, one of the fishermen dropped his fishing rod and drew a gun from his pocket. "Don't move, it's the police," he shouted. Marcus barked and punched Lena in the face with his fist, but he didn't let her fall. Instead, he took out a knife and put it to her throat. "Don't you move," he shouted to the cops. "Otherwise she'll go to feed the fish in the lake." The policeman froze, as did the other fishermen. "What an ambush," hissed Robertino in the bushes with annoyance. He also drew his gun. Steve looked at the gun at the detective, shrugged and whispered, "I hope you know what you're doing." "Don't worry," said Robertino and pointed the barrel at Marcus, who hadn't noticed him. A shot rang out. Lena was splattered with blood and Marcus fell dead. "Ready?" Robertino said smugly. And then Steve jumped out of the bushes. Lena rejoiced. "You're my hero," she said and climbed into a hug. But Steve kept his cool. He had gotten even with Marcus, and now he had to get even with his wife. For the betrayal. He gently held out his hand, palm outstretched, and said, "Marcus already got what he deserved, but not you. You still have it ahead of you." "Are you seriously?" Lena asked with a gasp. "I can't be more serious," Steve cut her off coldly. "You have to pay for everything." "But I've already paid with fear," Steve grinned. "It's not payment yet. It will be when I take everything away from you and throw you out on the street." Then Lena cried, "Please don't. Don't, please don't. I won't do it again. I promise." "Of course you won't do it again," Steve said. "Marcus is dead and you'll cheat on me the wrong way with another man." "You're the one with the nasty temper." Lena cried even harder, but that didn't shake Steve's resolve. Soon, the divorce case began. It went slowly but surely, and Lena realized more and more every day that she wasn't going to have a luxurious life. Yes, she tried several more times to ask Steve's forgiveness, but he didn't respond. So Lena did something desperate. She found a can of petrol in the garage, poured it all over herself, and went out into the courtyard. "Stop it now, or I'll set myself on fire," said Lena, holding the lighter in her left hand. Steve looked at Lena like she was a fool. He knew that his wife was foolish, but not foolish enough to burn herself alive. "Come on, Lena," barked Steve. "You've got 10 seconds. 9, 8. Anyway, that's how she got to 1. "What's your decision, Steve?" Lena asked at that moment. Steve looked at her again like a fool and said, "You're not crazy enough to set yourself on fire." And that's when Lena flicked her lighter. In an instant, she was a walking torch. Steve stood there for a few seconds, puzzled, and then called the fire brigade. When they put Lena out, she was barely breathing. Steve didn't look at his wife. He was too afraid of the consequences. And the consequences, well, they were well known anyway. The doctors diagnosed that 98% of her body was burned. Lena died that same evening. Steve was mentally traumatized and had to see a psychologist for a year. He was forced to forget about flying, so he switched to aviation engineering. He vowed never to fall in love again, but life is a tricky thing, and 5 years later, he did fall in love with a lady. They did not marry, but started living together in a common-law relationship. It was a happier life than the one they had before. Dear listeners, your support is very important to us. If you like our story, please like, comment, and subscribe. It's very motivating for us. We need your feedback to improve our content.